Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Hope you're doing well. We're continuing our reading of Friedrich Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra book. It is quite witty, quite sassy, and I enjoy reading it. Let us continue. We were on the section titled On the Gift-Giving Virtue, Part 1. When Zarathustra had said farewell to the town to which his heart was attached, and which was named the Motley Cow, many who called themselves his disciples followed him and escorted him. Thus they came to a crossroads. Then Zarathustra told them that he now wanted to walk alone, for he liked to walk alone. His disciples gave him as a farewell present a staff with a golden handle on which a serpent coiled around the sun. Zarathustra was delighted with the staff and leaned on it. Then he spoke thus to his disciples. Well, it seems like the first time Zarathustra's been kind of happy, right? A coiled serpent on a golden handle. Tell me, how did gold attain the highest value? Because it is uncommon and useless and gleaming and gentle in its splendor. It always gives itself. That's a very unique way of talking about it. It's useless, but it only... Well, I don't know how much they use it on electronics now, but the way it conducts something. Gleaming and gentle in its splendor, how it shines and really just looks beautiful when melted down. I think the Aztecs were quite remarkable with how they shaped their gold, and that's one reason why the Spaniards were so desperate to continue looting Latin America, because they found some of the beautiful gold. Only as the image of the highest virtue did gold attain the highest value. Gold-like gleam the eyes of the giver. Golden splendor makes peace between moon and sun. Uncommon is the highest virtue, and useless. It is gleaming and gentle in its splendor. A gift-giving virtue is the highest virtue. A gift-giving virtue is the highest virtue. Verily, I have found you out, my disciples. You strive as I do for the gift-giving virtue. What would you have in common with cats and wolves? This is your thirst, to become sacrifices and gifts yourselves. And that is why you thirst to pile up all the riches in your soul. That's a unique way of looking at it. Thirsting to become sacrifices and gifts yourselves. How one can sacrifice their life to attain a level of prestige, of honor, of research, of knowledge. It's hard work, and it's almost like they give up so much in order to attain that goal. And gifts yourselves to be a gift to the community in which you strive for, whether that be academic or otherwise. Sometimes people will say the phrase, you're a godsend, and that your inventions, your contribution to a certain field, it's really a gift to that field and accelerates it. So I think many of us strive to be a sort of sacrificial gift in many ways, if we love what we do. And that is why you thirst to pile up all the riches in your soul. Insatiably your soul strives for treasures and gems, because your virtue is insatiable in wanting to give. You force all things to and into yourself, that they may flow back out of your well as the gifts of your love. Verily, such a gift-giving love must approach all values as a robber. But holy I call this selfishness. So calling it a form of selfishness wanting to strive to gather up those little gems. Sometimes when you're dropping knowledge, people will say like, "Oh, you're dropping diamonds, you're dropping gems," because sometimes it's just something that sticks out, and you remember it, and it's so valuable, and it's like a currency of the mind. And so I can see how you can play around with this symbology here, both literal, physical, and spiritual metaphor. It's quite witty. Having an insatiable virtue and wanting to give gifts of yourselves, to give the gift of sacrifice of your time and dedication and mind and knowledge and life. You force all things to and into yourself that they may flow back out of your well as gifts of your love. So you force yourself maybe to learn, and then you talk about it, that goodness comes back, and it's like a gift. Maybe that could be one way of looking at that. The good thing about philosophy is that when you actually start to think about what it is they're saying, it's not just he only means X, Y, and Z. It's fascinating when you meet somebody who is able to see it from a different perspective than yourself, and you're able to discuss it, which is very useful. There is also another selfishness, an all too poor and hungry one that always wants to steal. The selfishness of the sick selfishness. With the eyes of a thief, it looks at everything splendid. With the greed of hunger, it seizes up those who have much to eat, and always it sneaks around the table of those who give. Sickness speaks out of such craving and invisible degeneration. The thievish greed of this selfishness speaks of a diseased body. Now this one is a very visceral point here. Contrast that he mentioned selfishness. Okay? Selfishness. On the top one, it was more gifts yourselves. Become sacrifices. Gifts of your love. Right? This other one here, though, is talking about the greed of hunger, and it seizes those who have much to eat. So, have much to eat. Those who can already have a lot of money, miserly hoarding and going after more riches that just never satiated with what they have in a different way than someone who seeks truth and knowledge. Rather, another can seek materialism or hedonism, just always coveting what others have, and even though there's food on their plate, they still gaze at someone else's plate, wondering what they can take. It's really interesting how he talks about sneak around the table of those who give. So they may have plenty, but they still go to get more when they are not in need of it. A sickness, and he calls it an invisible degeneration. So it's sort of inside really making them less spiritual. A thievish greed. So the greed of hunger, thievish greed, a diseased body, a sick selfishness. Very poignant language here. Tell me, my brothers, what do we consider bad and worst of all? Is it not degeneration? And is it degeneration that we always infer? Well, the gift-giving soul is lacking. Upward goes our way from genius to over-genius. But we shudder at the degenerate sense which says everything for me. Upward flies our sense. Thus it is a parable of our body, a parable of elevation. Parables of such elevations are the names of the virtues. Thus the body goes through history, becoming and fighting, and the spirit, what is that to the body? The herald of its fights and victories, companion and echo. That's a very unique way of looking at it. The spirit as a sort of companion and echo to the body. And the body goes through life, becoming and fighting. So becoming, you're always in a state of change and developing. You're not really at your final end, because since new information is coming in, you're shifting and you're adapting, and you're becoming a new person constantly. Not that you're shifting in a schizophrenic way, but rather you're character building and learning from your mistakes. You're adapting, you're striving, you're being steadfast and applying new knowledge, and so you're always becoming better than you were yesterday, and fighting in terms of your inner temptations and also your struggle to survive and thrive in the world around you. All names of good and evil are parables. They do not define, they merely hint. A fool is he who wants knowledge of them. Watch for every hour, my brothers, in which your spirit wants to speak in parables. There lies the origin of your virtue. There your body is elevated and resurrected. With its rapture it delights the spirit, so that it turns creator and esteemer. Creator and esteemer, and lover and benefactor of all things. When your heart flows broad and full like a river, a blessing and a danger to those living near, there is the origin of your virtue. This is interesting here. So, the way a river flows, it's a blessing. You get fish, you get minerals in the water stream, you get nice river rocks for cooking and construction, beautiful plant life. But if the banks overflow, you're going to get some flooding. The embankment's going to get all mushy, and some trees might be tipped over because the soil has been eroded, and it's quite a mess. So, and also if your little one goes and swims in the river and the current carries them away because it's just too fast flowing, that's also dangerous as well. Or your dog. Very unique the way to look at it. Too stagnant river gathers a lot of bugs and stagnant moss, and it's not as beneficial to bathe in or use. That flowing water, though, keeps things nice and clean. So if you're washing out the bad in your own body, spiritual and physical, and things are on track, it's all cleaned out. They're broad and full. When you are above praise and blame, and your will wants to command all things, like a lover's will, there is the origin of your virtue. When you are above praise and blame, where the praise doesn't affect you, you're not, accustomed to flattery, but also you don't do a lot of things that are blameworthy, or you endure a naysayer who's nagging at you. Could be very interesting to look at it that way. When you despise the agreeable and the soft bed, and cannot bed yourself far enough from the soft, there is the origin of your virtue. Okay, so despising the agreeable and the soft bed, and cannot bed yourself far enough from the soft. So not seeking to escape all discomfort. Being able to know the balance of comfort and suffering and hardship. And sometimes you have to disagree, and you can't just go along to get along. You can't just go along with the flow. And so there's moments to be agreeable, and there's moments to put your foot down, be the rock in the river, and say, I don't think that's a good idea, or I think this might be better, or what if we try this, right? It's good to be agreeable at certain moments in life, but sometimes there has to be disagreement, not on the level of utter discord and disharmony and anarchy, but at a healthy level where you're like, you've achieved this sort of balance there, with much nuance and gray area, I'd argue. When you will with a single will and you call this cessation of all need necessity. There is the origin of your virtue. Verily a new good and evil is she. Verily a new deep murmur and the voice of a new well. Power is she, this new virtue. A dominant thought is she, and around her a wise soul, a golden sun, and around it the serpent of knowledge. A golden sun, that's kind of reminds me of like the imagery that used to be used for kings, you know, the sun symbolism in rulers is very paramount, and also for a patriarchal lineage, the son of the king, bloodlines, heritage, monarchical patriarchal power, serpent of knowledge, like Christian verse, be ye wise as serpents, something something. In Chinese culture, the serpent is seen as something very wise. And then, because the snake has to be kind of smart to survive. But at the same time, there's also the negative aspect of the snake, where eating the eggs of others, biting people who didn't deserve it, impulsivity, because a snake must be quick because they are vulnerable, so they must strike, and sometimes they don't have time to pause and think, is this a real threat? But they have to strike lest they get stepped on. You know, there's a lot of ways of looking at it when it comes to the serpent of knowledge symbology. Very interesting section. That was the end of part 1 of that. And man, really has some nuggets of thought in there for us. And that was the section titled On the Gift-Giving Virtue. What do you think? He had quite a lot. And remember, they gave him a staff that had a golden handle with a serpent coiled on it around the sun. And then he ends that part by talking about a golden sun and serpent of knowledge. I remember Zarathustra is dropping knowledge on them, trying to guide them, and the sun being able to just light the landscape for you. There's a little less to not be seen. So in the night you have the moon, helps you see a little bit, but during the day the sun is like, boop, I'll show you what's up, right? By the permission of Allah, it shows you. So when you are trying to be as wise as a serpent, knowledge of a serpent, you are shedding light and dispelling shadows that create illusions and doubts. There's a lot of different ways you could look at it, poetically, metaphorically, and whatnot. But that's the fun part about Nietzsche, is you can interpret his stuff in a number of ways. Let me know what you think, and if you'd like to join my blog, it's www.subscribestar.com/MilahanArchive. Hope to see you there.